This week on streaming, I saw Blondie Johnson, a 1933 Warner Brothers picture. Pre-code is fucking hell, and a really good one. I think you're gonna love it if you check it out. TCM has a streaming service. Not a lot of people know about this. You can't pay monthly for it. You have to have access to a regular cable account, use your regular cable login to get into it. I don't got cable. I borrow a friend's login. You should ask around. You should probably know somebody you can borrow the login from, and then you can watch TCM streaming. It's a great thing. Blondie Johnson caught my eye because I love Joan Blondell, who is our heroine, our lead in this film, and she fucking kills it. And it's cool because it's a different turn for her. Joan did a lot of comedies at Warner Brothers. She did a lot of hard-boiled comedies. She usually plays sort of a street-smart character, but here it's a drama. This is a drama. It is a crime drama. And it's a big role. She has a lot of big acting moments, even in the opening scene. And this is such a pre-code depression movie, which Warner Brothers was famous for. We open, she's at the relief office, down at the welfare office, begging to get some relief for her. And there's like a kind of a stern-looking guy behind the counter asking her some questions. Where do you live? They say, back room of a pharmacy. She says, how do you live? How do you live? Who supports you? We get help from friends. People bring us food. Are you working? And this is where it turns. No, I quit. The boss wouldn't leave me alone, which is, not even really code. It's just the way that you would have said, the guy wanted in my pants or I couldn't keep the job. Well, you shouldn't have quit. I had to quit. Well, he tells her there's a lot of people worse off than she is. She's got a roof over her head and people who are bringing her food. And she looks around and sees that he's not wrong. So this is, it's not black and white, right? I mean, it is a black and white film, but this is a story where we have gray situations. Yes, her situation is bad, but she can't really argue with his logic, but she does have a sick mother, and she goes home to find out that she has succumbed to pneumonia. Right away, this movie does feel a little bit in the vein, a lot in the vein of Babyface. And I checked, they came out the same year, different writers, different directors. I kind of wonder if Warner Brothers was putting their eggs into two separate baskets, one with Joan Blondell and one with Barbara Stanwyck, because they do follow a very similar format, although Stanwyck's is a lot darker. This movie here, we open, her release into the world is the passing of her mother, and this is the turning point for her character. She swears that she needs money and lots of it, and she's gonna get it. We get a great line. There's two ways to make money. Yeah, I know, the easy way and the hard way.
I'm in this business to get all I can out of it from you or from anybody. I found out that the only thing worthwhile is dough. And I'm gonna get it, see? I'm gonna get it.
Of course, Babyface, which is deserving of its own watch and review, and I think is also, it is also currently on streaming on TCM. I don't know when you're watching this, but it is as of this moment. They rotate their library. Babyface is one of my, prime examples of this is what pre-code cinema is. Pre-code, of course, 1930 to 1934, period in which there was no censorship. You could actually make movies about anything you wanted to, and they really did. Once you get into 1934, there is heavy-handed censorship, very direct. There's the Code, which is a series of explicit rules. There must have been also a lot of implicit rules, because as my wife observed once many years ago when we first got into pre-code cinema, she was like, it's crazy because on 1935, it turns on a dime. You go from having female characters who are self-assured, competent, and independent, savvy, heroines in these movies, and also femme fatales, although that is more of a noir concept, actually, which is the 40s, to immediately having women who have no agency. Basically, they are props, rare exceptions, but for the most part, they are no longer centers of their own stories. And that may surprise you, that movies, I honestly think that a lot of pre-code movies are in so many ways more progressive than films that were released even in the 1980s. She arrives in New York and pulls a very small con on a taxi driver who's played by Sterling Hollowell. You will recognize him most likely as the voice of Winnie the Pooh, but at this point in his career, he was doing a lot of on-screen work for Warner Brothers, and it's always a joy when he turns up. Small con in which she bets him the fare on a game of $1 poker, right? She then reveals how the con works, and he says, oh, I know, but look, and reveals that they are directly across the street from where he picked her up and that he was conning her for the fare, and all's fair game. They decide to team up to knock over a couple of marks at speakeasies that night, and it's a great con where she stands outside of the speakeasy and portrays a woman left in the lurch by her boyfriend And she needs to get back to the hospital where she's a nurse or she's going to lose her job, and finds some big spender to pay for her cab fare, which of course Sterling Hollowell shows up to collect, and they split the proceeds. One of the things in pre-code movies that you're going to see is that there are detailed instructions on how to be a con artist or a criminal. There are things that would work and that you could go do after you left the movie theater in a lot of these movies. That is an explicit thing that comes about in the code. You could no longer do that. She gets caught by one of the marks, who turns out to be the member of a local syndicate, says, I've got maybe a job for you. And they start to hit it off. They're going to get his friend Louie, off on a murder rap. He has a plan, she has a better plan, and they bring it to the boss, Max Wagner, who is revealed to be sort of the boss of everything going on in town. He says, no, I don't want to get him out. I want to let Louie go. We're going to let him do a stretch. It'll be 18 months on manslaughter. Not a big deal. Our leading man, Danny, who is now teamed up with Blondie, they don't really like this idea. Louie's a friend, and he's a little bit put off by the fact that Max would let any of his guys do a stretch if he had the option not to. Blondie points out to Danny that, your boss is just scared. He's just scared of exerting any influence to get this guy out of jail. She's afraid of the cops. Let's just do it ourselves. And they do. Blondie comes up with a great con where she portrays in the courtroom the pregnant fiance of Louie, and of course he is acquitted on all accounts. Louie, it's a great scene because Louie, who is played by Alan Jenkins, always wonderful in these movies, they had no way to coordinate this plan with him, so he is just completely nonplussed while this woman he's never met is professing to be his pregnant fiance, but thrilled nonetheless, that she's going to get him off. Max is quite put out by it. Not a fan. So there are a couple of confusing time jumps here. Things just seem to move forward without warning. We get the impression that months have passed and this little clique has formed of their gang. You've got Joe, Louie, Danny, Eddie. There's a whole little crew there, and they're malls. Gangsters, gals. I think mall is the correct term, of which Blondie is one. Max is sent out of town on some business, and Blondie has the idea to pick up their own protection racket, to kind of take it over. So she pushes that, and we see how they work together to convince a jewelry store owner to pay into their insurance, their protection racket. It is one of the most complicated cons I've ever seen portrayed in cinema, and it is filled with very detailed instructions. They succeed. I think one of the great moments here, and I talk about the difference in how women were treated in pre-code cinema and in the code, is that after they collect their takings, the men kind of excuse themselves, and we see Blondie and the malls divvying up the cash. They are running the gang. They are equals. They keep Danny as the face of the gang for a while. That relationship sours as Danny makes advances on Blondie. And although it's very clear that she has very strong affections for him, even loves him, she rebukes him because she has this kind of meta-awareness that the femme fatale will always be the downfall of a great man, and that she's not really ready to not be that person yet. I think that's wonderful. I really think that is such a cool, awareness. I don't know what the word is I'm looking for here, but it's a great moment in this movie. One of the things I love about pre-code cinema is that you get to see the reality of what was on people's minds in the Depression and in the 30s. Because we knew our grandparents and they were mostly pretty conservative, we think of the 50s as like sort of the end of history or the beginning of history to some extent, because that's the generation that you had communication with mostly growing up if you're my age. We have this idea that the past in America was very button up, and men in the gray flannel suit, and women had their place and men had their place, and things were very tidy, and white picket fences. And of course, if you've read any history, you know that that's not true. But culturally, there is this sense that that's sort of how it was. But when you go right behind that time frame and you look at the 30s, no, people were having very frank discussions in cinema, in major media, about everything that was really actually going on. It's the code that changes that. And 14 minutes into this movie, Blondie describes that, I had a sister. She got into some trouble when she was 15 years old. We're talking about teen pregnancy now. Didn't have the money for a doctor, and she died getting a back alley abortion. Whoa! Like fucking whoa, man. 1934 or 33 when this came out. I think that what happened to America in some regards is that, 1935, really, the code goes into force. 1934 is still pre-code. But think about who is growing up right then, right? So what is it? Like 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds are in, really being, this is their formative years. They're going to the movies with their parents. All of a sudden, this is what they're seeing now, this anesthetized version of reality, this very, very G-rated, because basically that's what the code did. Every movie had to be what you would now call G-rated. Those are the people who get raised and go to war in 1941, primarily. And there's a shift in that buildup towards 1941 and then thereafter from let's propagandize America's cultural values to let's propagandize America's military nationalistic values. And this is the environment that your grandparents, my grandparents, completely were formed in. And then they come back from the war, and none of that ever really stopped. It didn't stop till 1968, a little bit, when a movie called The Pawnbroker essentially breaks the code and eliminates the cinema code. My thesis about this, about pre-code cinema, is that had the main effect on the 20th century society of America. Because if you look at Depression and pre-code, there is a lot of leftist, anarchist, socialist commentary and discussion going on in movies, in the mass media of the day, on the radio, etc. This is what people were thinking about. There was a lot of movement in that direction, and it evaporates once you get into American values with the creation of the code. A lot of these movies from the 30s are famous for their snappy dialogue. I have heard that is not an inaccurate way that people spoke. I think that there's a great deal of embellishment, but there are some wonderful moments. Danny asks Blondie, what are you trying to do? Put ideas in my head? And she replies, there's plenty of room for them. Another great moment is when Danny is trying to make clear his intentions towards Blondie. And she says, look at all these guys tied down with their women, They're going slow. They're not going places. And to which Danny replies, they may be going slow, but they're having a lot more fun getting there. Which, love that. It's beautiful. Things take a turn in this film, though, when Max gets wind that this little mini syndicate has taken over his protection racket. He comes back to New York and they try to kill Danny. He gets hit by a car. Blondie is terrified. This is right after she's rebuked him. Sprints to the scene of the crime, horrified about, never being able to express her feelings. But then he recovers. He comes out okay, and it's back to business as usual. He's a little bit soured on her. She's rebuked by the fact that he's soured on her, but she never expresses her feelings there. After Danny recovers from his little accident, our friendly syndicate get together and eliminate the boss, Max, and take over the whole operation themselves, right? Months go by. They are running the city. They kind of have a little bit of a falling out. Danny marries another woman. Blondie never expresses her feelings for him. There's a lot of money to be made. And then Danny's kind of pushed out. He's pushed into the lurch. Louie ends up getting picked up by the cops for the murder of Max. And everybody figures somebody talked, and it must have been Danny. There's a little bit of pressure, and Blondie agrees that he's got to go. And Joe and Eddie head off to take care of Danny, and bang bangy. Moments later, Blondie finds out that was absolutely not the case. The police got their information from somewhere else, and Blondie is again sprinting to rescue Danny, but now from her own hit. She arrives too late. He's been plugged. He's bleeding out. I find that a lot of these movies have like a real ending, and then it was all a right ending, and you can kind of, it's ambiguous in some ways. You can choose, I think the movie ended there. It's a very touching moment. He wants to die in her arms, but then he recovers, and the police come, and they all get convicted. Blondie's being set up for 6 years in prison, which is a long time to send your heroine to jail for, but they agree to wait for each other and go straight when they get out. And that's where we end on this one. So much fun, an absolute blast. What a joy it is. I am surprised at every turn of these movies. Yes, the scripts themselves can be formulaic, but the dialogue and the things that are discussed and the specifics of what happens and where we go and the representation in these movies is always surprising to me. For example, I mentioned that we had this kind of inversion of the sexes where Blondie and the Malls are kind of running the gang and divvying up the loot. One of them, Lulu, is played by Toshia Mori, a Japanese actress, and she is not really played Japanese or as the quote exotic in this film. There's no fake accent here. She is exactly equal to everybody else. It is essentially completely unremarkable that she is present. There's no attention drawn to it. And you don't really get that after this period. To be fair, there is a lot of very negative representation in the pre-code era, and a lot of it. But I think that there is just as much positive, or at least nonchalant, representation, particularly from Warner Brothers. I'm thinking it's Lady Killer, which is a James Cagney movie where we get something kind of similar. He's a gangster who gets kind of made into a Hollywood star, and it's sort of his experience, of like, oh, okay, like this is what life's out here, and as a Hollywood star, he is given a bungalow and a housekeeper, or a Good Man Friday, a butler who happens to be Chinese. That character throughout the entire movie is performing a very big accent, very kind of a Fu Manchu caricature, until the climax of the movie, when suddenly the accent drops and Cagney is shocked, says, "What the hell happened here, man?" He says, "Oh, that's just an act. The studio boss likes me to be that way." I just thought, like, whoa, what a way to fuck with your audience. The Warner Brothers movies of the pre-code are, I think, exclusively socially conscious. They are all really ahead of the game in terms of representation, politics, and ideals, and good. Honestly, there's a lot of movies made by Paramount and MGM from that time frame. I'm not really into them, to be frank. It's mainly Warner Brothers that I'm after. They had a handful of turns where they attempted to do some Warner Brothers stuff, but and First National Pictures is also like a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. This was actually released under the First National brand. So if you want to get into pre-code movies, look for Warner Brothers. Something too that we don't understand anymore, but back then the studios all had their own genres. They all had their own genres. MGM was primarily going to do movies that were of a fantastical nature. Paramount was doing movies that were of a very luxurious nature, about fabulous wealth. And Warner Brothers did mostly pictures that were about gritty crime and comedies, and actually like inventing the romantic comedy, for example. Really fun stuff. I encourage you to check this out while it's on TCM. This is something new, by the way. We're just going to try some stuff out here on Midnight Local's YouTube channel. Maybe a weekly movie review. Meredith is on the road right now. I did this one on my own. We're not really sure where we're going to go with this. Either we're going to collaborate on these, or maybe she'll do her own. And we're just going to try some new stuff on Midnight Local. And I hope you will subscribe, like, and comment. Tell me what you think. Go check it out while it's available. Go see Blondie Johnson. Tell me what you think. I would love to hear, especially if you've never seen a pre-code movie before. Let's do some more of that. I'll see you real soon.